Let's talk about significant figures. And make sure you stay to the end because I'm going to give you an assignment. I'm going to give you some examples and I want you to comment the solution once I teach you my method for doing significant figures, okay? Now, when you learn this in class and you're following a textbook and the rules that they outline there, it's usually a pretty confusing set of rules. I've had many students over the years that have struggled with significant figures because there's all sorts of scenarios, leading zeros, zeros between non-zeros, trailing zeros, and a zero before the decimal point or after the decimal point. It's just tedious and overly complex for no reason. So I have two scenarios, each one with one rule. So in other words, I have two rules. It's that simple. So once I teach you this, you're gonna find doing significant figures a breeze. So let's talk about the two scenarios. One of them is numbers that have a decimal point somewhere in the number. Doesn't matter where it is. So we have numbers with a decimal point, and then we have numbers without a decimal point, right? And let's look at some examples for them. And let's say I'm going to do, let's do 201.0. And then let's just use those same digits. Let's do 0. Oops, let me go a little lower there. Let's do 0.2010. And let's do something like, let's do 500 point, okay? So those will be our three examples for numbers with decimal points. And let's make up some stuff that, for examples at numbers that don't have any decimal points at all. So over here, if I do kind of the same thing as I did here, I'll do, let's do 2010. Let's do 201, and let's do 500, okay? So those will be our three examples for each scenario. And now let's look at the rule. But before I write down the rule, guys, if these videos help you, please give a like, follow, subscribe, share, and comment. You can request me to do videos on a different topic, or if you have any questions about this particular topic, or you can just drop by and say hi. And if you'd like to go further, you can check out my links so you can patronize me. That helps me to continue making these videos for free, okay? So now let's get into it. So the one and only rule for the scenario of a number that has a decimal point is we start at the first non-zero and count from there to the end. So I'm going to say from the first non-zero to the end. So let's see what that looks like. So over here, we go from the first non-zero. Well, 2 is not a 0, so that's where I start. And I just go until the end. So I just go from here to the end. And I like to draw this. I like to underline the first sig fig. And then when I have the decimal point, I just show that it goes to the end. And remember, sig fig is short for significant figure. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4 significant figures, or sig figs. 4 sig figs. Let's look at the next one. We have from the first non-zero, well, that's a 0, and that's the first number that isn't a 0. So we go from here to the end. Because this number has a decimal point somewhere in it, we use this set of rules, or this one and only rule. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 significant figures again. So that's 4 sig figs. And then on the last one, again, we have the first non-zero, and we go from there to the end, because there's a decimal point somewhere in the number. So that's 1, 2, 3 significant figures, 3 sig figs. Now, if I had 20 more zeros after this, those would all also be significant because we go from the first non-zero to the end. If this one was 0.0 or 0 point and then 20 zeros and then the 2010, that would still be 4. Because you don't start counting sig figs until you hit the first non-zero, okay? So it doesn't matter how big the number is, find the first non-zero in it and go to the very end. That first non-zero and everything after it is significant, okay? So how easy is that? Now let's do numbers that do not have a decimal point. And it's just as simple of a rule, but instead of going from the first non-zero to the end, we're going to go from the first to last non-zero. Okay? So from the first to the last non-zero, let me just kind of partition these here. So that 2 is the first non-zero. So I'm going to underline it. And then I go to the last non-zero. I'm going to underline the last non-zero here. And then I'm just going to kind of draw a little link to show that from the first to the last one, everything in there is significant. So that's 3 digits. So there are 3 significant figures. Over here, from the first to the last non-zero, and that and everything in between. 1, 2, 3 significant figures. And then over here, that's the first non-zero. It's also the last non-zero, right? Because everything after it is a 0. So that only has 1 significant figure. And so we can see the difference between a number with a decimal point, like 500 point, and just 500, there's a big difference in significant figures here. And so that makes that decimal point very critical. When you are writing your answers, if you get 500 grams from something and there's supposed to be 3 sig figs, make sure it's 500 point. If you forget that, depending on how strict your professor is, that could be a deduction on your exam. So those are the rules. I'm about to give you some examples that I want you to comment how many significant figures each one has. And in the next video, I'm going to continue on with this and do how many significant figures you get after doing some sort of mathematical operation. So in other words, when you multiply or divide numbers or add or subtract, that affects how many significant figures you get in your answer. So that's going to be in the next video. So you guys check that out. And now here, let's do some examples. Let's do 0.005010, and let's do 2050, 1, 2, 3 point, and let's do the same number. That's actually 2,050,000 and no decimal point. Okay, guys? So comment your answer. How many sig figs does each of these numbers have? And please, again, if this helped you, like, follow, share, subscribe, comment, and check out my links to patronize me over there to keep making these videos for free. I'll see you in the next one. Guys, I want to make one more comment that I didn't think to make when I was recording that initially, which is that the one exception to significant figures are precise numbers, or numbers that are infinitely precise. So in other words, if I have 5 apples, I count 5 apples, that is not one significant figure because it's just 5. It is infinitely precise. So we don't really count significant figures in those situations, right? So just remember that if a number is infinitely precise, it's not going to affect the significant figures in your calculations, which I will talk about in the next video. Okay, thanks again. See you in the next one.